Today we have economics professor and Senate candidate for the New Liberals Party, Steve Keen, in the driver's seat. How you doing, Steve?
Very well, mate. Looking forward to this. I've only sat in the passenger seat of a Tesla before with my mate Steve Bannister over in Utah, so I'm looking forward to this experience.
Nice, and the steering wheel's on the other side as well.
Which is we need right-handed vehicles for Australia, and this is right-handed, and it's a breeze for the manufacturing, which is so different to an ICE car.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're going to really enjoy this, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation today because I've been following you for a few years, and I've seen quite a few of your YouTubes. You've got a big following around the world, and you're also friends with someone who I really admire, who is Yanis Varoufakis.
Yeah, good mate.
Yeah. So
enough of him.
Yeah, amazing guy, and I'm really looking forward to the drive. We're going to talk a bit about Australian politics and economics and the kind of things that the New Liberals want to do if you can get into government.
Yeah, well, not into government so much, at least getting a couple of seats and having the balance of power. That's the ambition for 2022. But the long term, yes, definitely. The current Liberal Party is no longer fit for purpose and cannot reform itself. It needs to be replaced. So the long-term ambition for the New Liberals, we've got to call them TNL on the ballot because the Liberal Party and the Labor Party got together to ban the use of any word in the name of an existing political party which currently had seats in Parliament. Wow. So we couldn't call ourselves the Green Labor Party, for example, or the Green blah Party, because the Greens could potentially challenge us. They haven't. They probably wouldn't. But the Liberal Party challenged us, and now we have to call ourselves TNL.
Wow. And they're doing that obviously because they're threatened.
Yeah, they're threatened. Well, they're saying, you might get people who think they're voting for the real Liberal Party and they're voting for you lot instead. Yeah. Well, some of them are doing it quite deliberately, thanks very much. Yeah.
Wow. All right, fantastic. Okay. Well, let's get into it. Hard down.
Hard down.
That's in drive.
Right, okay, the car. Okay, that's cool.
And that's it.
So now you're ready, and now I can just put the foot down.
Yep, and your indicators on this side as well.
Okay, so. All right, well, nothing coming. The crazy thing is how there's nothing to let you know the engine's ready to roll.
Yeah.
Unlike with an ICE car. Now, have I still got the indicator on?
Yeah, just soft down or turn that off. Yeah. All right. But
I'm being cautious because I do not want to damage this car.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's there's some pretty amazing safety features in the car.
That's regenerative braking, isn't it? Taking the foot off.
Yeah, that's right.
It slows right down, so the braking is actually refueling the battery.
That's correct. So you can see when you touch the accelerator, that black line.
Yeah.
That's drawing off the battery.
Okay.
And then if you let your foot off, that green line is
actually charging it. And it's actually very significant. I mean, let's honestly how long it would take to stop. I'm doing 60. I take the foot off here. I'm not touching the brake, and we slow right down. Almost like if you'd actually really tried to put the brake in a normal car. So
you can actually drive this car with one pedal around town.
I can see.
There's a guy. There's a guy who's done over 400,000 kilometers with the same brake pads because he's not using the brakes, basically.
Yeah. I mean, this is a 60. Okay, I'm doing slightly over. This is typical. You can just feel the pull in the engine as soon as you. I mean, I'm afraid to really try. You know the joke about Elon Musk when he had started building Tesla, but he owned one of those top-end sports cars,
McLaren or something.
McLaren, that's right. And he was with some other wealthy dude, and the guy said, "What can this guy?" He said, "Watch this."
Yeah.
And he then put the foot down, and the car spun, and I think they ended up upside down, didn't they?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now, this is the hairpin bend thing I told you I came down.
This is a decent ride,
on the back of the garbage truck.
Wow.
With my bicycle. Whoa, fuck. Okay. On the other side of the valley, and this is where I rode with an old mate who was very unfit. I was extremely fit. And we rode our bikes. We went to Mittagong and rode down. On the other side of this, on both sides of the valley, we've got this hairpin bend feature. Holy shit.
Yeah. It's no nonsense.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
And so we did the ride down, and I just said goodbye to him, and I overtook a Porsche on the way down the hill. And then on the other side we started climbing back out again, which I was looking forward to. I wanted the exercise. And then a garbage truck or some sort of, it was sort of plant refuse, not actual garbage, but sort of plant plant refuse. They drove past us, making a hell of a racket, of course, because it's a diesel. And somebody said something to us, which I couldn't hear, and neither could my mate. He just waved, and they pulled over on the side of the road, thinking they'd offered us a lift.
Yeah, wow.
So we hopped on the back, and the other side, which you'll see in a moment, rather than riding up it, we just lay back and watched the scenery go by.
Nice.
So I regretted it because I wanted the exercise, but this is the last time I was on that road, and holy shit.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be a better car to do this road than this one.
Wow.
But yeah, and you can feel how flat it is around the corner.
Oh, very.
And that's because of the battery pack
is
very low center of gravity. Yeah, this is another level, and really all internal combustion engine vehicles, they're really all like 19th century technology, just with a few bells and whistles kind of put onto them. And really the electric vehicle uptake has been really suppressed for a few decades now. Like we had in the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. In the 90s we had GM.
It was a Volt, wasn't it?
They brought out one called the EV1.
Okay.
There's a documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car?
Yeah.
And it's all about this.
Okay.
Just enjoy it.
Yeah. Jesus.
Yeah.
Holy fuck. Okay. Oh my God.
Yeah, the brakes work very, very well as well if you want to try it.
That's the first time I've touched the brakes, just when I saw that car coming over the other side of the hill. Jesus, this thing performs.
Yeah, and it's stuck to the road. Like it's...
it's glue.
It's like almost like a
Whoa! It takes some courage on your part to let people drive your very expensive car.
I think because I know it handles so well, and because of the technology in it, the collision avoidance technology, that gives me a lot of confidence. Really, I'm more worried about climate change than I am of someone crashing my car.
Fair enough. You and I both are.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Just the responsiveness.
Yeah, it's just instant.
The only other time I've experienced this was with Steve Bannister in Utah. Hey, Steve. He came over to where I was working with Matthias Griselli and Tim Garrett on thermodynamical models of the economy, plus my own models bringing energy into the production.
Mm-hmm.
And he dropped over and said he wanted to go for a drive, and he touched the accelerator 2 or 3 times, and I got that feeling, surprised at the level of takeoff.
Yeah. But you still don't, even in the passenger seat, it's a whole different feel when you're driving it.
Yeah. Being very cautious around those corners in case there's a truck or car coming the other way.
It's quite beautiful through here. So whereabouts are we?
Kangaroo Valley.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of the most beautiful spots in most of the beauty in terms of where there's flora to enjoy, as opposed to the desert is along the east coast, of course, and this is Kangaroo Valley is just right near Sydney, and it's just an absolutely beautiful spot, but people rarely come through it. So it's great to give a car like this a trial on.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, because you can take corners quite fast, but still feel very much in control.
Yeah, well, like I know this capacity I'm not using. A good mate of mine, Rob Harden, is a motorcyclist, and he takes his bike out to race around Eastern Creek and stuff like that. He would love this. Mind you, he's a Tesla skeptic.
Is he?
I want to show him this
Has
video.
he driven one?
No, he hasn't.
That's why he's a skeptic. Yeah.
Far out.
Now I don't want to interrupt your fun here, but I was gonna ask you about your thoughts on neoliberal economics, or I think you call it neoclassical economics.
Neoclassical is the school. Yeah, but, I mean,
in the history of that in Australia, I'm 39, so I guess I've grown up in the neoliberal paradigm, and I haven't really experienced anything other than that, and a lot of people are in the same boat.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what started neoliberalism, and where is it today?
It starts from neoclassical economics, and the neoclassical school basically sees capitalism as a system to achieve equilibrium, where they define equilibrium as being a situation in which you can't make any one person better off without making somebody else worse off. They call that one Pareto optimal equilibrium. But they basically see
zero-sum game kind of thing. Is that
not so much zero-sum game, but they see it as being a system where we optimize. So that they've got, if you like, from an engineering point of view, they see capitalism as a way of solving an optimization problem that maximizes collective welfare without making anybody else worse off in the process. And it's all like, if you have an engineering background, it's 19th century pre-thermodynamical physics. Basically mechanical physics, mathematics, but what that gives you a vision of when you're a young student, and I can remember this myself when I studied it at high school, it shows the market as a perfect system, and any government interventions make the system work worse, unions make it work worse, and monopolies make it work worse. So what it makes you into is a zealot for reforming, in your way of thinking, capitalism, so that it becomes a system where there's no power concentration. So you want to have small firms, more competitive, perfect competition they call it, no trade unions, workers compete for jobs and get their marginal product, as it's called, and it's seen as a system that basically it's meritocratic. It's a vision of a perfectly meritocratic society, and that vision is so compelling that people, as I said, they become not economists, they become zealots for a vision of how the economy should be designed. So that's the economic side of neoliberalism. And on the other side, and I blame the Labor Party under Hawke and Keating for this, and particularly thinking of Lindsay Tanner, whom I had a few arguments with at various times during the writing of the Accord documents back in the, I've forgotten, but at the 70s/80s period. The idea of neoliberalism was to combine good management of the economy with socially progressive policies. And they define good management as being following neoclassical economics. You want to have competitive markets, minimal government intervention, competitive labour markets, etc., etc. And my attitude was that this vision of how capitalism works is a complete myth. It's a equilibrium vision of a complex system. Complex systems don't achieve equilibrium. Their equilibrium, if they have them, are unstable. And that's the vision you need. You need a biological vision, not a mechanical vision. Is the
It's
just gorgeous, and so what the neoliberal vision, and Hawke and Keating were really responsible for bringing it about, was the idea of, combine textbook economics with socially progressive policies, and that'll be the best of all possible worlds. And my vision was that, look, it'll work for a while, because largely you're unleashing the financial sector, and then it'll crash, and you'll discredit those social policies. And that's pretty much what's happened. I think a lot of the rise of the reactionary right is because they were the ones who suffered in terms of like working class jobs being exported to third world countries rather than happening back here, particularly in America. Deindustrialization, de-skilling of the workforce, and also you're losing the unions, you lost your bargaining power, so the wage levels fall. And then the real people who bore the consequences of that were the working class. And that's the larger reason why the Republicans in America and the Liberal Party out here could actually harness what, the blue collar, what used to be the blue collar, then I call it the redneck, the blue collar vote. And that's what undermined the success of Labor parties around the world. And the Labor Party itself is responsible for it by adopting this vision of accepting the textbook vision of economics as being the description of what an ideal economy should be.
And was it Thatcher and Reagan that kind of ushered in this era? Or was it before?
It was before, and that's why I say it's the Labor Party. I mean, the classic statement came out of one of Maggie Thatcher's advisors. He was asked if he'd be, because at the stage they were fighting against the Harold Wilson government, I think it was, the Labor government, so Maggie succeeded in defeating the old-style socialist Labor Party of Wilson, and her main advisor was asked, will you be, I'm sure you'll be delighted when you have, the Conservatives take over. He says, I won't be happy to have a Conservative Party in power. I'll be happy when there are two Conservative parties vying for office. And that's what neoliberalism meant. The Labor Party under Blair copied a lot of the market-oriented beliefs of the Labor Party under Hawke and Keating here. And what we got was two conservative parties vying for office.
Yeah.
And that's been the nature ever since.
The Labor Party just looks progressive next to the other Conservative Party.
Yeah, well, what I was supposed to say, basically, the Liberal Party, the Australian Liberals being arch reactionaries, implements neoliberal policies and brags about it, and the Labor Party implements neoliberal policies and apologises for it. That's about the difference.
And so we've seen over the last few decades as well the continuation of the concentration of wealth, and even last year we've seen billionaires like Gina Rinehart increase their wealth dramatically when a lot of people at the other end of the spectrum are losing wealth and losing income. Do you see this continuing, or do you think it'll hit a certain threshold and people will demand a change?
What do you reckon?
Your indicators aside, you're right.
Whoa! My God, do you overtaken this thing?
Yeah.
I think they were still blinking back there.
This one's the indicator, yeah, but you're good.
Yeah. Sorry, but I was repeating.
Oh, yeah. So we've seen over the last year billionaires like Gina Rinehart increasing their wealth dramatically, whereas a lot of other people at the other end of the spectrum have actually their income has dropped quite a bit. Is this part of this trend of wealth concentration? And do you think it is going to get to a threshold where people have had enough and will want some kind of change?
Oh, if you get people not being able to put food on the table, that's when you get breakdown. And in that sense, that the Gilets jaunes experience in France is a precursor of that, because Macron put that tax on diesel ostensibly for global warming reasons, but the real reason, from the looks of it, was to fit within the Maastricht Treaty limits on budget deficits. And you instantly had this huge protest because people, with that small increase in the cost of diesel, could no longer, be able to put food on the table every night. So it's when you get to that point that you get a real breakdown, and things haven't hit that level in Australia yet. But one of the reasons people are so anti the lockdown experience is because they weren't given enough government remuneration to make up for the lack of being furloughed, losing their jobs, etc., etc. And there's anger out there which is being directed both ways. It's anger going conservative, anger going radical. So the centre is falling apart in that sense. And I think there will be a point of breakdown because, again, when climate breakdown hits, there'll be an economic collapse as well. And there's no telling when that would actually happen. But when it does, like you're seeing with food prices and oil prices, that the Kazakhstan stuff happening because of increasing cost of energy there, you get people going into revolt because they simply can't make ends meet, and that's when you get street riots and so on. And Kazakhstan looks pretty damn devastating on that front at the moment. It's mainly over the price of energy.
Yeah, wow. Last year we saw the government drop 300 billion or more into JobKeeper program when people needed it. Now that hasn't continued, but I feel like it showed that the government does have the capacity to do those things.
It's got tons of capacity, and this is the thing which is so frustrating for people in my tradition in monetary economics, that know that the government creates money. It doesn't borrow, it creates money when it runs a deficit. So it has an effectively infinite capacity to create money. Whether it should create that much money is another story, but the physical capacity is there. And the last time we ever had an experience like this was the Second World War, because at the time you had, take America into case when the war was started to build up to the war, and then America was selling manufacturing weapons for the British at this stage before they actually got pulled into the war by Japan. You had unemployment fell from 20% of the population to zero in a matter of years, and it was because the government was simply spending to create to hire the people and pay the companies to make the weapons to ship over to the war. And then, of course, when they got dragged in on the same scale. And what became apparent to the financial managers in the government at the time is that the government didn't have to sell bonds to raise the money. In fact, it was selling bonds so that people would buy the bonds and therefore not have the money to go and buy consumer goods.
Yeah, right.
It was there to suppress demand. It wasn't there to provide the money for the government to build the weapons.
Wow.
And so it's simply a vision of accounting, understanding the accounting. And the reason that the mainstream economists don't do it is they leave money out of their models completely.
Mm-hmm.
They make money, if they have money in their models at all, the monetary system is a prediction of their so-called real economy side. So they don't understand monetary accounting. But when you understand the monetary accounting, and that's why I built my Minsky software to make it easy to comprehend that, the government, when it runs a deficit, it puts money in people's bank accounts and it puts reserves in the bank's accounts at the same time. Mm-hmm. And then when it sells bonds to the banks, it's offering the banks an offer too good to refuse. It's saying, would you like to swap those reserves, which you can't trade, which don't earn interest, for bonds, mm-hmm. which you can trade, and which do earn interest? And of course they say, yeah, go right ahead. So it's not at all like us borrowing money. Yeah. So there's no limit on the capacity of the government to do that, and they can run a 30% deficit without a problem in terms of the monetary side. As the problems come, what happens with that 30% of GDP deficit on the physical economy, and that's why MMT, modern monetary theory, argues the main constraint on the government is not the capacity to raise the money, it's the impact of generating that much money on the level of economic activity, and could you cause inflation?
Mm-hmm. So inflation is the constraint, really.
There are other constraints, but that's the main one. Yeah.
And I guess last year, or the pandemic, has shown what governments are capable of during crises, and it's really what we need to do with the climate crisis as well. Like there's really nothing stopping the government from dropping billions of dollars into renewable energy and clean technology in general. And they could have done this for the last couple of decades.
They could have, and it's just the belief that the government is, like a household, that we can't raise the money. All this, paranoia over government debt, and in Australia, Liberal and Labor are both guilty of it. Mm-hmm. I hope that the Labor Party is just doing that to remain a small target and will behave differently in office, because Anthony Albanese has a background in non-orthodox economics, having done a degree in political economy at Sydney Uni. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that that's going to be the case. Because they're all scared by the way they lost the last election when Bill Shorten was too frank about their policies. But in general, it's just this fear of the bogeyman of the government running out of the capacity to borrow when it doesn't need to borrow at all in the first place.
Yeah, and that idea has been smashed a bit in Australia, because if we think back before the pandemic, you'd always hear Josh Frydenberg talking about surplus and deficit constantly, but we don't hear that kind of language as much these days as we did. Is that right?
It'll still come out at some point, particularly if the Liberals, as they almost must do, lose the election and Labor takes over, they'll bang on about government debt straight away. So one major thing, if any of the Liberal people get into Parliament, what we'll be saying is this is nonsense. The government doesn't face that constraint. And rather than being Labor, defending themselves for running a deficit, we'll say you should be running a deficit, because the government running a deficit is one of two ways of creating money. The other is banks lending out more than they get back in repayment. So bank lending creates money, but it also creates an identical amount of debt for the person doing the borrowing. Whereas when the government runs a deficit, it creates money in the hands of the public that does not include a debt for the public. And for itself, it includes a debt which its own reserve creation, which goes hand in hand with, if you put money in somebody's deposit account, you've got to put money in the reserve account of the banks as well. Mm-hmm. So that's what enables the government to sell its bonds and get them 100% purchased. There's no problem with it doing it. And with the interest, effectively, it issues more bonds to cover the interest. And if the Reserve Bank buys those bonds, which is 2 or 3% these days of the actual bond issue, it's all completely sustainable. Mm-hmm. And government debt, like in the case of the UK, I think government debt after the Second World War, because of the Second World War, reached 350% of GDP.
Yeah, wow.
It's now come down, down below 50%, up to about 100%. But government debt is just a measure of how much money has been created by the government. Mm-hmm. And it created a huge amount of money during the Second World War, and then it wound it back. And as it wound that money back, people started borrowing from private banks. And what that then led to is the bubble in private debt during leading to the global financial crisis. So a large part of the financial crisis we've actually suffered was because the government wasn't creating enough money.
Yeah, right. Yep. Fascinating. And the New Liberals also have very strong stance on corruption, and I understand the New Liberals leader, Victor Klein, is really pushing for a strong ICAC.
Yeah, I mean, the level of corruption has got so endemic in Australian politics that Berserkian, whatever her name was, have it pointed out that she was pork barrelling using government funds in the state level to pump into a marginal electorate.
It's been normalised.
And normalised. Yeah. Everybody does it. Well, that's wrong.
Yeah.
You know? The government, particularly with federal governments, which can create money, state governments can't. But using control of the government to try to buy the re-election of your political party is corruption, and that should be illegal. And all you have to do is have a statistical gauge and say, what's the probability that 98% of the money for this particular fund went to Liberal Party electorates or marginal electorates? Yeah. What are the odds of that being done in a responsible fashion? 0. Yeah. That's corruption.
That is corruption.
So we carry it that far. But the way that Morrison is trying to describe it is literally only criminal behaviour could get you guilty for that. That's what the criminal law is for. Yeah. We're talking corruption using the illicit use of state power by a political party. And so, Victor's stuff can seem quite heavy on that front because he was a prosecutor. He did put people behind jails for breaking laws. And he's saying, we put the bastards behind bars. That's sort of, a bit extreme when you first hear it, but he's saying we want to have a system of corruption control that is so strong that people don't behave in a corrupt way in the first place. Okay.
Yeah. Can you imagine if all cars were like this on the roads?
Well, the trouble is that all be doing that.
Yeah. Well, we'd probably, because it's so safe, we'd probably be able to go a lot faster as well. Like our speed limits might increase. Well, maybe not on this road, but on freeways and stuff.
Well, full self-driving will mean the cars are basically interacting with. It's going a bit faster than I intended there, but
that's
not a
handles it fine.
This is the one that I came down on the racing bike and overtook a Porsche.
Oh right. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
nice.
You'll see, my mate lost touch with him. He's a good guy, but he was out of condition. I thought, I'm going to enjoy this bit, so I just took off.
Yeah.
And then I went down to the bottom and I waited half an hour. I thought, God, he must have an accident. And then finally he comes down doing a fist pump.
Oh, right.
He got a buzz coming out. But with me with a racing bike and being super fit, and this hill, Jesus, it was a buzz.
This is a great road, isn't it?
It's a wonderful road, yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the corruption thing, it's so important because it is affecting Australia's response to climate. It is stopping us from taking the urgent action that we need to get on top of this problem.
Well, one of the forms of corruption, of course, is that you have donations to political parties. And like in Australia, we are basically both parties, more so Liberal than Labor, but both parties are pretty much captured by fossil fuel interests. In the case of Labor, it's because a lot of their representation of trade unions with workers in fossil fuel industries. With the Liberal Party, it's big donors who own the fossil fuel companies. But what you get is fossil fuel friendly policies. So that, for example, for people outside Australia would not know this, when the government's response to COVID was to establish 30 or more gas mines.
Yeah, the gas-led recovery.
Yeah, gas-led. So, what does COVID justify? More fossil fuels.
Yeah. And even the NCCC, the national...
Oh, my God. Okay.
The NCCC that was set up, it was chaired by a gas executive.
Yeah. So what you've got is a complete buyout of the political system. And one thing we still haven't discussed this inside the party in great detail, but I want to ban political donations completely. And what that would mean is you would use the government money creation capability to fund political parties, partly based on past votes for existing parties, partly vote on sort of seeding new parties like ours, obviously. and therefore remove any chance for money to influence politics.
Yeah.
But at the moment, money dominates politics in this country,
Yep.
and that is what we mean by corruption. Not that some bloody minister's committed a criminal offence, which is the way Morrison's trying to describe it. It's money dominating politics.
Yep, exactly. And the Greens
That's
also.
the corner over to the Porsche.
Oh, right. The Greens also want to ban political donations as well, and I think it'll have a huge impact on our democracy.
What we're hoping is, I want to get into the Senate, obviously, in New South Wales. Got a good candidate in the Senate in Queensland and South Australia as well. We're still working on getting candidates in all states, but we want to hold the balance of power and literally say, you're not going to get supply through unless we get an ICAC.
Yeah.
And that's what we want, a balance of power, and it's like-minded parties, and this is exploiting the proportional representation and compulsory voting sides of the Australian political system, which are a gift that we haven't used effectively yet. So people can still, they can give Labor their ultimate preference if they give us their first.
Yeah.
They can give Labor their first preference and give me the second, and then the surplus votes that go above the quota, Labor might get 2.4 electoral votes in the Senate out of 6, and then if people can give our party the second preference, we'll get the 0.4.
Yeah.
And so you can still vote for the party you prefer if you're a bolted on Labor voter, but end up getting a set of independents in the Parliament who will. Thank you very much,
nice
mate. Very nice of you. The porn. Very nice.
And it's looking like a minority government is on the cards, because we're seeing this incredible independence movement across the country.
Yeah.
We're seeing 30 or 40 voices of community groups that are kind of based on the Voices of Indi model, and just seeing massive community engagement with these groups. And I think a similar thing has happened with the New Liberals. I remember Victor tweeted. So, well, first of all, the Liberal Party or the government has increased the threshold for
500 to 1,500 members.
Yeah. And then I remember Victor tweeted, we need some more members, and within 48 hours you had over 2,000 members.
Yeah, we went from, I think it was about 12. I think we had 1,200 members, and we went pretty much double it in 2 days.
And that just goes to show the vibe that's out there. People are engaging with politics a lot more this time round, even than last election, I feel.
And what it is, there isn't a charismatic Labor leader like I had with Gough Whitlam. You don't have 21 years of Conservative rule before it. You have bad memories from the last election with Shorten, so Labor's taking a very low profile. And in that sense, the high profile has been taken by the independents.
Yeah.
And again, the beauty of the proportional representation system is you could vote for another independent before you vote for me.
Yeah.
The vote passes on. You could vote for us as a party and then for another independent before it goes to Labor. So what we're really seeing, I think, is a community revolt against career politicians.
Yeah.
And that's both sides of politics. The Liberal Party being much the worse on this front. But most of the people who get into Parliament these days have either worked as a staffer in a minister's office, or they've been in a state political office or the federal, and they're basically career politicians.
Yes.
And what you get is an incredible attraction of this political system to outright narcissists. And then what you get is a self-serving nature of politics, people who make decisions who don't have the capacity to reason those decisions through. And I think there's a general community revolt against that. And that's what led me to, when Victor asked me to not just be an advisor to the party, but also run, I thought, why not? Because I've tried to get the ear of politicians for decades and found you can't, So why not try getting the mouth of one instead?
Yeah, and I think it's an incredibly exciting time for Australian politics, especially after COVID and all the things that have happened. But I really do get the sense that at the moment there is a change in the air. You can kind of feel it, and we desperately need it because. First of all, we do desperately need to take action on climate. We wanted to talk about climate change a bit more and what economics can do to help solve climate change? Or how has the economic model of the last few decades impacted our response to climate change? So what role does the economy play in addressing climate change, do you think?
Well, the economy is what's causing climate change. Because if we were just, if we'd stuck at the level of our cousins, the bonobos and the chimpanzees, there would be no climate change. We'd be consuming energy at much the same rate as any other species on the planet, and there'd be no change in the carbon dioxide level, and there'd be no toxic chemicals, because the only toxic thing we'd have would be our feces, and the planet knows how to cope with that well and truly. So it's the fact that we've got an industrial economy driven by fossil fuels that is the reason why climate change is occurring. And the trouble is that's a given. That should be absolutely obvious. But the trouble is we have an economic theory that is completely divorced from the physical world. They have no concept of physical inputs to produce output. They used to have it. If you go back 40 years ago, economists used to use what they called computable general equilibrium models to model an economy. And that would say to produce a car you need steel. To produce steel you need iron ore. To produce iron from iron ore you need coal. So you'd have a matrix array of inputs to give you a matrix array of outputs. And that was a feasible foundation, even though it obsesses about equilibrium, a feasible foundation for modelling the impact of the economy on the biosphere. There are still people who use those models, but the vast majority of economists now work with models where they simply have output being produced by technology, which you can otherwise call fairy dust, because they have no concept of how technology is produced, combined with labour and capital. They don't have energy as an input to their models. So they're completely unaware of the pressure we're putting on the biosphere by using the energy we've found for free in the environment. Nobody made the coal, nobody made the sun, so we're just exploiting the free energy. And they're not aware of that role at all. And of course, when you exploit free energy, if you have any knowledge of engineering, you know you must produce waste. So therefore, you have a link between using energy sufficiently to raise us well above the background energy level of consumption of ordinary biological only animals, and therefore we're necessarily dumping waste into the environment, and that waste is what's causing.
And there's no cost
change.
Applied to that in economics either, is there? The pollution, there's no cost to put it on.
Well, they call it an externality, and they always say that you want to price the externality, and that's their approach to carbon dioxide. They said, well, we should put a price on carbon because you currently don't pay for the pollution, so we put a price on it that'll limit it, and the market will find the optimal level. But my attitude to that, well before I started reading the economic literature on climate change, starting with William Nordhaus, was that when you tell me the price of carbon that's going to stop Antarctica melting. The market doesn't price in changes in the far future. But then when I looked at the economics of climate change, I mean, I've read some shit in the last 50 years of neoclassical economists, but the garbage they published on climate change was the most shocking nonsense I've ever read. And the real danger of the economics as opposed to the economy is that all the dangerous interactions the economy has with the ecology are completely trivialized by mainstream economists. And like just recently, just last year, 3 papers came out by different groups of mainstream economists, one claiming that a 4-degree increase in global temperature above pre-industrial would reduce the GDP in 2100 by 3.67%.
Wow.
3.67%.
Wow.
2 points of decimal points of accuracy, compared to what it would be if there was no global warming at all.
Wow.
Another paper came out saying that if we had 6 degrees of global warming and we lost Arctic summer sea ice, Greenland goes, the West Antarctic goes, the Amazon jungle goes, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which most people would know is the Gulf Stream, which keeps Europe warm, that goes. Permafrost all gets released, ocean methane hydrants get released, and the Indian monsoon goes crazy. That would reduce GDP by 1.4% compared to a world in which none of that is lunacy.
Absolutely absurd.
And this is the garbage economists are coming out with. They've got this deluded vision of what climate change actually means. It's just making things a bit warmer, and they treat it's just the same as if you move from New York to Florida, and they'll do a correlation between temperature and GDP and say, well, Florida GDP is about 20% lower than New York, so if you gain 10 degrees in temperature, global GDP will fall by 20%. And that's literally how they think about it. And that is completely, insanely wrong. So what they end up doing is treating an existential threat as an optimization problem.
Yeah, it's just insanity. And you hear this from journalists as well. You often, over the last 2 decades, you'd hear the question, what's the economic cost of acting on climate change? And it's just madness to think of this problem in that frame.
In optimization terms, yeah. What are the costs and benefits? That's the sort of thing you use for a small marginal change, not something where you change the entire nature of the planet.
Yeah.
The biosphere, and that's what they're doing and treating that way. So, you'll read economists like Richard Toll, who reckons that all we'll do if there's literally, he said on Twitter, like a 10-degree increase in temperature, we'll just all move indoors and use air conditioning.
The disconnect is just
total disconnect
incredible.
with the physical world.
Yeah.
And yet they're so confident in their Dunning-Kruger idiocy, but they refuse to get challenged. And the trouble is, humans trust experts, or have trusted experts, because the world is just too complex for you to know everything about what you use. But the last time that any human being could have understood every piece of technology they use would have been sometime in the 1890s. Now it's just, you have to trust that an airline pilot knows how to fly the plane, that the plane's designed so it'll take off and land safely, etc., etc. So we innately trust, even with all the current skepticism over COVID, we trust experts, and we treat economists as experts on the economy. Unfortunately, we have a school of thought, neoclassical economics, where they are experts not on the economy but on a model of the economy that is wrong, and therefore
that filters through the whole society.
We're going to walk into this catastrophe, and they're going to be the last ones to see it coming, just like they were the last ones to see the financial crisis coming.
We spoke about it earlier, this film Don't Look Up, which has just come out in the last couple of weeks, and you enjoyed it as did I, and I think for a lot of people who have followed climate for many years and understand how serious the problem is, watching that film, a lot of us felt or really identified with the characters, because a lot of people, I'm not a climate scientist, I'm an engineer, but a lot of climate scientists, economists who understand climate, and activists have been screaming at the top of their lungs for the media and for our government to really take this problem seriously. And I think the film really articulated that well. And hopefully that film, I mean, I think it's been seen by 150 million people or something now. It's the third most watched Netflix film in history. Hopefully that will boost the climate movement globally and encourage more activists and scientists to get even louder on this issue. All the way flat, hit it.
Jesus, holy shit.
That's good.
Far out.
Just let your foot off now.
I have.
Let it come down.
It's breaking.
Yeah, let it come down. Let it come right down again, because we've got another bit of straight here. Well, it looks... That's all regen, and now whenever you're ready you can do that again
and do a complete flatten.
Yep, all the way to the floor.
Oh Jesus, far out. The stability of the car at the speed is incredible. Jesus,
unreal, eh?
And that's nothing compared to the Plaid.
Yeah, the Plaid that would make this feel like a golf buggy, I guess.
Jesus Christ. I'll do it again. I'll do it from here. Like, what do you reckon that distance is? 100 metres?
Yeah, it's probably 150, I reckon, to that bin.
That's the overtaking lane. Okay. Let's see what we're doing by the time I get to it. Jeez.
That's good. That's good.
Far out.
Yeah. It's wild, eh? Yeah, this technology, this is what cars should be like in 2021.
Yeah.
It's crazy that we're still driving around in these old 19th century pieces of junk.
Yeah, which it is. I mean, there's one thing that Marx wrote about. He said the dead hand of the past reaches out into the future, and then partly, and Schumpeter talking about the opposite side of that. Once you have a technology established, there's an incredible inertia to hang on to get that technology extended as far as you can go, and that's what's happening with the internal combustion engine. So we just continue pushing and pushing and pushing, and you're fine-tuning a current paradigm. But a new paradigm, the last people we can expect to bring it in are the ones who are profiting out of the existing paradigm.
Exactly, and that's why all the legacy automotive companies, they have fought tooth and nail against including electric vehicles in their fleets, and they still are.
Make an entire factory obsolete.
Yeah,
they're not about to do it. Whereas, that's why it didn't have to be somebody coming in from the outside. It could have been one of the companies deciding to make the move, but the reality was it was Musk coming in from the outside.
Yeah, around to the right here by the looks.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right, and the really the establishment. The oil industry, the fossil fuel industry, it's 100-year-old plus industry, and basically they have such influence over government that they can really suppress new threats or new technologies. Like the oil industry generates, I think, over $2 trillion US per year. It's something like $5 billion US per day. So every day that the oil industry can delay the electric vehicle uptake is worth $5 billion for them, right?
And this is one reason I'm critical of trying to do everything through international agreements, because the oil industry knows that humans are terrible at agreeing internationally, and therefore they'll support things like COP26 because they know it'll never happen, never do anything significant.
Yeah.
If you wait to the stage where we're doing it all at the international level, it'll be far too late. And even like carbon pricing. Did you see that amazing video where two oil lobbyists were being interviewed by a sort of undercover crew that claimed that they were looking for lobbying support?
No, I missed that.
Oh, it's fascinating. It's two Washington lobbyists, and they thought they were touting for business. So they were bragging about the fact that they were supporting carbon taxes in the Congress because they knew they would never be passed.
Wow.
Okay. So a whole lot of things which economists have argued in favour of. In this case, they've been exploited by the oil industry rather than doing the bidding of the oil industry. But a guy called Ben Franter is worth reading on that front. Ben's done the work in how these consultants have delayed action on climate change. But it's all done for a short-term profit motive. But it wouldn't, if we had engineers running the show rather than economists, it would never have got this bad because engineers would have understood there are physical constraints.
Yeah.
And with economists having this mythical view of a world where you can continue growing indefinitely.
Infinite growth.
Infinite growth. I think a few rebel economists have been wise about this. So William Baumol made the line that if somebody believes that it is possible to have infinite growth on a finite planet, he's either a madman or an economist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just wild. Are you seeing a change though, with the modern monetary theory, the growth in modern monetary theory, popularity of it? Are you seeing a shift in the mainstream around economics now?
Not really. Well, the mainstream is fighting back. They don't want modern monetary theory to take over, and from their perspective, modern monetary theory is crazy because they have a model where money is what they call a veil over barter. So they say you basically remove the veil and you can see what's going on much more accurately by not including money at all in your models. So with that perspective, to have a group saying, look, money is essential and you have to understand money to understand capitalism is a complete affront to their paradigm. And normally they could ignore the Marxists, they could ignore most of the post-Keynesian school of thought, they could ignore Austrians, because we're all minorities and any of them never really got the ear of the public. But because modern monetary theory has been successful in getting the ear of a large number of activists and then some journalists and being reported in the media and so on, they now see it as a threat. So they're fighting against modern monetary theory and trying to dismiss it. And all their dismissals come down to a lack of understanding of the accounting, the actual accounting of monetary flows in a mixed fiat credit economy, which is what we live in.
Do you see other countries taking this up at all?
In terms of any, again, you've got to get past the economists, and the economists dominate the treasuries. Like, for example, I was invited by the Treasury of New Zealand to come and develop a Minsky model of the New Zealand economy. And this was the Secretary of the Treasury was a fan of my work and wanted it to be done. And I was blocked by the economists.
Wow.
They couldn't comprehend the approach to modelling that I was using. And they fought tooth and nail to stop the New Zealand Treasury funding me. And so finally, reluctantly, the Secretary just, look, I just can't convince the staff to work with you, so I can't go ahead. And so it's that resistance from the economists. Because economists dominate almost every economic department. The Treasury dominates all other departments. The Treasury is full of mainstream economists. And then in most of the other departments, the person who gets to be the secretary is also an economist. So you've got this mindset that just blocks any thinking about the economy that doesn't fit inside a neoclassical
self-perpetuating as well.
And that's the problem. Yeah. So in terms of a country adopting it, that country would need to have its treasury economists accepting the accuracy of modern monetary theory as a description of the monetary system, and then accepting complex systems analysis as an explanation of the interface between the economy and ecology, and understanding input-output dynamics and all this other stuff, which is completely foreign to the training of a mainstream economist.
I feel like in late 2020, I remember reading that Philip Lowe did have some positive comments to say about MMT. Do you remember that?
And I have to take a look and see.
Yeah.
I mean,
vaguely remember.
That's the reason I designed Minsky as a piece of software, because Minsky lets you model financial dynamics, the actual accounting of it. And so I've just been doing some models of one of the proposals the Neoliberals will have for reducing house prices without bankrupting banks and without reducing the equity that people who've benefited out of the housing bubble actually have. And so it's easy to build the accounting in Minsky because that's what it's built to show,
right,
of the monetary dynamics. But that stuff is completely foreign to how economists are trained, so they're always going to resist it.
Yeah, wow.
So, I'll have to read and see what Lowe had to say. But, I mean, I remember whenever I was involved in the overseas aid organisation world for a long time, and we had a lovely guy, Russell Rollison, he's still alive and kicking. I think he's working on water these days. Truly lovely man, who was a straight economist, and I would be criticising comparative advantage. And his attitude was, well, what we should do with the aid organisations is promote comparative advantage, get countries to specialise in what they're the best at. And this is just, every time I'd sort of point out flaws in comparative advantage, I could almost see his brain reorganising the argument to fit back in with a comparative advantage picture. So once you've got a paradigm like that,
it's hard to step out of it.
Yeah, you can't step out of it. So it's a gorgeous country, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fantastic. What do you think economists actually think is gonna happen with the climate crisis? Do you think many economists actually understand what's happening with climate? Or?
No, they don't, and it took me a long time to accept that, because I thought these guys have been working in this area for 30 years. They've surely talked with scientists, surely they understand what climate change actually means. But I finally came to the realisation, no, they simply don't. All they think is it's going to get a bit warmer. And, like, for example, there's a new OECD paper out that includes a model by climate scientists on what would be the impact of losing the Gulf Stream at a 2.5 degree increase in temperature, those two factors together. And what they got out of it would be a 70% fall in the amount of land of the planet that was suitable for wheat farming, and about a 60% fall in the amount suitable for corn. And they describe that as catastrophic decline in food output. Well, the economists, this is where Richard Toll comes in again, they also modelled the impact of losing the Gulf Stream. And they got, if the Gulf Stream disappeared completely, they got a 1% increase in GDP, because their model only includes temperature. It doesn't include precipitation.
Wow.
Okay? And so they said, it's going to get warmer, and we presume the temperature going to get not warmer, the temperature will get more towards an optimal temperature, and therefore we also assume everything else in climate will get towards a more optimal level as well, as if temperature and precipitation move in the same direction.
Wow.
But the genuine climate scientist models, which include both temperature and precipitation, said you'll turn the climate of Europe into the equivalent of today's Sahara.
Wow.
And that will mean, and equally America not so much, but mainly Europe and large parts of America become unsuitable for wheat farming and corn farming that are currently dedicated to it. So and this makes me laugh in some ways, because economists rave on all the time about specialization, specialize in what you're best at. What they've actually done is duplicate badly the climate models that climate scientists do. And most of their models, and they'd admit this is a 2021 paper came out admitting, or just stating, that it was sort of we've got to admit this, we might as well, we're not too worried about it. Our models only include temperature, we don't include precipitation changes. Now, how can you model climate change without including changes in rainfall as well as changes in temperature? But that's the simplistic shit they do.
They've got the blinkers on, narrow vision.
Very, it is tunnel vision, and it's also groupthink. They all talk with each other. They don't listen to, it's not a school day, is it?
No.
Let's do that anyway.
I think so.
They all listen to each other. They all think they're geniuses, and they don't take criticism from the outside. So, for example, one thing they do, and this is literally done in the paper on tipping points, to model tipping points, they use a quadratic, y equals x squared. That's the damage, Damage is temperature squared times some coefficient, and they use a trivial coefficient for it, and they can see no problem with using a parabola, y equals x squared, to model the impact of climate change and tipping points. Now, people have been screaming at them, saying for a decade, you can't use quadratics, you can't use a simple y equals x squared polynomial to model climate change. It's just the wrong sort of function. And they, we like your criticism, and the next paper comes out and it's using quadratics. They just don't break away from it.
And we spoke about this earlier, there's just so many variables involved in climate, and even
produce just a change in temperature.
Ecological collapse and stuff like that affects
biodiversity. So it is, rather than specializing, what economists practice is imperialism. They move into another field, and they believe they can do it better than the people currently doing it. There's actually a paper by a guy called Ed Lazaire, who died recently. He's a decent bloke, actually. I met him in Adelaide some years ago. But he was Bush's chief economic advisor when the financial crisis hit. And in 2000, he published a paper literally titled Economic Imperialism. And the idea was economics was the only true science in the social sciences, and it should take over all other fields.
Wow.
Okay. And the same mindset even applies when they come to climate change. So, rather than saying, well, we should take the output of scientists and then assess the costs of that economically, they said, we'll do our own models. And when you look at the models, they do not include, for example, precipitation. They might compartmentalize the ocean into surface, deep, and very deep, and have carbon exchanges between, so they don't do it entirely badly. But they leave out precipitation, and then they try to tell us what's going to happen with climate change.
It's maddening, and I mean, can only hope that finally the world is starting to get it, and that we do start to take the action that we need to. It really needs to be. I feel it needs to be almost a war scale effort now to
It has to be a war scale, but the thing is, you only undertake a war scale effort when you actually see the enemy.
I
mean, you go back to 1939, Peace in Our Time from Chamberlain, and the only person, not the only person, but one of the people, most prominent people warning about the Nazis was Winston Churchill, and he was screaming at the top of his lungs, until the invasion of Poland, and then people, this is serious, and that's when the war effort began in earnest. And I think it'll be a similar thing as I go left here. I'm going wrong way.
I guess we don't think about that, do we? But in the lead up to the First, Second World War, there would have been a small number of people who are trying to raise the alarm, who are ignored for a long time, and then all of a sudden it's, oh shit, it's here. Maybe that's where we're getting to.
And I think that's my expectation. So, I'm going to try to everything. If I do get into Parliament, everything to say, let's slow down, let's move across to renewable energy. The neoliberals have set a zero carbon by 2030 target, which we know is virtually impossible. But you've got to try the virtually impossible to avoid the unthinkable. So we're going to go with that policy. So we're doing whatever we can. But at the same time, I think we have to be prepared for saying we're not going to succeed either in engineering terms or politically to get there. So when we do finally take climate change seriously, it'll be after something so catastrophic, so terrifying, that everybody realizes, oh shit, the Germans are coming, or the Nazis are coming. Something
all
like
hands
that.
on deck.
The climate Nazis are coming. And we've got to do something about it. And then you would accept the sort of privations that were accepted during the Second World War, where people accepted ration cards. You know, and drastic drop in your consumption, so you reserved as much as possible for the war effort. And that's not any particular human's fault. To me, that it just comes down to humanity lives on a trajectory, and nobody questions whether it's not nobody, but the people in power don't question whether it's sustainable. The people benefiting it don't question whether it's sustainable until it ceases being sustainable, and then you react afterwards. So to me, the most important thing is to policies that mean, okay, we try to slow it down, but if we don't succeed, we can do something on the other side of the crisis becoming apparent.
And I think once we do hit that emergency mode, again, going back to the Second World War, we know that humans did completely transform their economies within a very short period of time. What was it, a year or two? And a lot of industries were converted over for the war effort. So we know that humans are capable of dramatic kind of shifts.
If we realise it's absolutely essential that it happen. If we realise it's an existential threat, and there's no way in the public's mind that anybody realises it. Extinction Rebellion and the youth have a concept of that is existential. By the way, just want to note, it's amazing to stop at a set of lights and not have to put a handbrake on or keep your foot on the brake because the car simply stops.
And not to be burning up petrol while you're just stationary as well.
What an experience.
Thanks very much for coming for a drive. It's been great chatting with you, and good luck with the election.
Thank you.
It would be great to see you in Parliament House.
I hope I get there. Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay. That was great.